Look, I never thought I'd be the girl telling this story, but here we are. I'm Sabrina. I'm 30 years old, and I just destroyed the best relationship I ever had for one stupid night in Vegas. But honestly, everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster when really I just made one mistake. One. And now my whole life is falling apart because apparently nobody believes in forgiveness anymore. When I met Chris 3 years ago, I was completely honest with him about my past. I mean, I wasn't about to pretend I was some innocent little virgin who'd only been with two guys. I'd lived, I'd had my fun in my 20s, experimented, dated around. Most guys would have run screaming, but Chris said he didn't care. He said he loved me for who I was now, not who I used to be. Sweet, right? Maybe too sweet. Honestly, he was one of those guys who tried so hard to be understanding about everything. Like he was constantly proving to himself that he was okay with my past. But whatever, he proposed after 3 years. And I said yes because I was ready to settle down. I was 30. He was stable with his job in the tech field, and my parents absolutely adored him, my dad especially. They'd spend every weekend working on some project together, and mom would make these huge Sunday dinners where Chris would sit there listening to dad's boring stories like they were the most fascinating things ever. It was sweet, but also kind of annoying how hard he tried to impress them. The engagement felt like everything I thought I wanted. The ring was decent, not huge, but not embarrassing either. We started planning this whole wedding, and honestly, it felt like I was finally doing what I was supposed to do. But then Kara called about Vegas, and something inside me just got restless. Kara was this friend from my wild days, and she'd always been jealous that I found someone stable. She'd make these little comments about how boring Chris was, how I was settling, how I was too young to be tied down. I should have told her to shut up, but sometimes I wondered if she had a point. Chris was safe, predictable. Maybe that's exactly what I needed, but it wasn't exciting. When Kara suggested Vegas with her and Haley from my work, I figured, why not? One last girls' trip before becoming a married woman. Chris wasn't thrilled. He got that look he always got when he wanted to say something, but was trying to be the cool, understanding boyfriend. I told him it would be fun, just the girls, maybe some shows, definitely some drinking. He knew Kara wasn't his favorite person, but Haley would be there, and he trusted her. Haley was this sweetheart from my office, completely different from Kara. She was the type who'd make sure I got home safe and didn't do anything stupid. At least that's what we all thought. Looking back, I should have seen what was coming. Not because I was planning anything, but because I know how I get when I'm out with Kara. She brings out this side of me that I thought I'd grown out of. But I was engaged, committed, and I honestly thought I was past all that. I thought I could handle one weekend in Vegas without everything falling apart. I convinced myself it was just a harmless girls' trip, that I could have fun without crossing any lines. The whole time I was packing, Chris was being supportive but distant. Like he was already bracing himself for something. He kept asking if I was sure I wanted to go, if maybe we could plan a trip together instead. But I was determined to have this experience. I felt like once I got married, I'd never have the chance to just be young and carefree again. I kept telling myself it was normal that engaged women went on bachelorette parties all the time. This was just an early celebration, right? Chris drove me to the airport, kissed me goodbye, and told me to have fun but be safe. The guilt I felt watching him drive away should have been a warning sign, but I pushed it down and focused on the excitement of the trip ahead. The Vegas trip started exactly how I expected. Kara immediately trying to get us to do shots at the airport bar at like 2:00 in the afternoon. Haley was rolling her eyes, and I was somewhere in between, trying to be the fun friend, but also the responsible engaged woman. The whole flight, Kara kept making these comments about how this was my last chance to really live before I was tied down forever. She kept saying stuff like, "You're about to be someone's wife. Doesn't that sound boring?" And honestly, it was starting to get under my skin, not because I agreed with her, but because she wouldn't let it go. Every time I'd mention Chris or the wedding, she'd make this face like I was talking about a prison sentence. When we got to the hotel, Kara immediately started planning our night. She'd researched all these clubs and bars, had this whole itinerary planned out. Haley seemed tired already, but I figured one night of fun wouldn't hurt. We got dressed up, went to dinner, had some drinks, and honestly, it felt good to feel attractive again. Not that Chris didn't make me feel attractive, but there's something different about getting dressed up and going out with your girls. I felt young and free for the first time in months. The first bar was fine, normal, Vegas stuff, but then Kara wanted to go to this upscale lounge, and that's where things started to get interesting. There were these guys there, clearly successful, well dressed, and they were obviously interested in us. Kara immediately started flirting, which was typical for her. But then they started buying us drinks and asking about our lives. I should have mentioned Chris right away. Should have made it clear I was taken, but the attention felt so good. And these guys were charming, funny, nothing like the usual Vegas sleazeballs. One of them kept complimenting me, telling me how beautiful I was, how he couldn't believe someone like me was single. I corrected him, told him I was engaged, and instead of backing off, he just smiled and said that made me even more attractive. Red flag, right? But I was feeling good from the drinks and the attention, and it seemed harmless enough. Haley was getting uncomfortable, I could tell, but Kara was eating up the attention. These guys mentioned they had a suite upstairs, said we should come up for drinks and to see the view. Kara was immediately on board, and honestly, part of me was curious too. The suite sounded amazing, and what was the harm in just hanging out? I knew what could go wrong, but I also didn't want to be the boring friend who ruined everyone's night. So when they asked again, I said yes. In my head, I was telling myself it was just hanging out, just having fun. I wasn't planning on doing anything wrong. I was engaged. I loved Chris, and I was just having one last night of excitement before becoming a wife. But deep down, I think I knew I was lying to myself. There was something about the attention, the way these guys looked at me, that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. The suite was absolutely ridiculous, like something out of a movie with floor to ceiling windows, looking out over the strip. These guys had clearly done this before, had drinks already set up, music playing, the whole setup. Haley was sitting on the couch looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. But Kara was already making herself comfortable, flirting with the taller guy who'd been buying her drinks all night. I was somewhere in between, trying to play it cool, but feeling this weird energy in the room. The guys were smooth, charming, but there was something about the way they looked at us that made me feel like we were already part of some plan they'd made. I should have trusted my instincts, but instead I had another drink and then another. The conversation was flowing, and these guys were really good at making us feel special, like we were the most interesting women they'd ever met. They kept asking about our lives, our jobs, our relationships. When I mentioned I was engaged, they didn't back off at all. If anything, they seemed more interested. The one who'd been paying the most attention to me said something about how engagement was just a piece of paper, how I was still free to live my life and make my own choices. It was such a stupid line, but with the alcohol and the atmosphere and the way he was looking at me, it felt profound, like he was giving me permission to be myself instead of just Chris' future wife. Haley kept trying to catch my eye, and I could tell she wanted to leave, but Kara was having the time of her life. These guys were everything Chris wasn't: spontaneous, exciting, a little dangerous. They made me feel like I was missing out on something by settling down so young. I know how that sounds now, but in that moment, it felt real. Like maybe I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life by getting married when I was still so young, still had so much living to do. The night kept escalating, drinks kept flowing, and at some point, Kara disappeared into one of the bedrooms with her guy. The music got louder, the conversation got more personal, more intimate. Haley was practically begging me to leave with her at that point. She kept saying we should go back to our room, that this was getting out of hand, but I told her to go if she wanted to, that I was having fun and would be fine. The look she gave me before she left, I'll never forget it. It was disappointment mixed with genuine worry, like she knew exactly what was about to happen and couldn't stop it. But I was already too far gone to care about her judgment. After Haley left, it was just me and these two guys, and the energy in the room completely changed. They started getting more physical, more forward, and instead of stopping it, I let it happen. I told myself I was just having fun, just living a little before I got married and became boring, but I knew exactly what I was doing. Knew I was about to cross a line that I couldn't uncross. And I did it anyway because in that moment, I wanted to feel wanted, desired. Like I was still the kind of woman who could drive men crazy. I wanted to feel like I had power, like I still had choices. And I convinced myself that what Chris didn't know couldn't hurt him. The next morning, I woke up in that hotel suite feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Not just from the alcohol, but from the weight of what I'd done. The guys were gone, they'd probably left hours ago, and I was alone in this massive bed, trying to piece together exactly what had happened. The details were fuzzy, thank God, but I remembered enough to know I'd completely destroyed my relationship. I got dressed as quickly as I could and went back to our room, hoping Haley would be asleep and I could pretend nothing had happened. But she was awake, sitting on her bed, looking at me with this expression I'd never seen before. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me like I was a stranger. When she finally spoke, she asked if I was okay. And I could tell she was trying to give me a chance to explain, to make it seem less bad than it was. But I couldn't even look at her. I just mumbled something about having too much to drink and went to shower. The rest of the trip was awkward as hell. Kara was bragging about her night, completely oblivious to the tension between Haley and me. Haley barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was short, cold responses. I tried to act normal, but I felt like I was falling apart inside. Not because I felt guilty. I was still telling myself it was just one night, just a mistake that didn't mean anything, but because I knew Haley was judging me, and I hated that feeling. The flight home was torture. I kept thinking about Chris, about how he'd probably planned something nice for when I got back, how he'd want to hear all about the trip. I practiced lies in my head, stories about shows we'd supposedly seen and restaurants we'd been to. I convinced myself that if I could just get through the next few days, everything would go back to normal. Chris would never have to know, and what he didn't know couldn't hurt our relationship. But the moment I walked into our apartment and saw Chris's face, I knew something was wrong. He looked different, distant, like he was seeing me for the first time. At first, I thought maybe he was just tired from work, but then he said Haley had called him. My heart completely stopped. That backstabbing witch had called my fiance and told him everything. She'd called him from the airport before we even left Vegas and told him exactly what she'd seen. I tried to deny it at first, tried to say she was exaggerating, that nothing really happened, but Chris just looked at me with this expression of complete disappointment, like I'd confirmed everything he'd always worried about. He didn't yell, didn't scream, didn't throw things. He just sat down on our couch and said he needed time to think. That silence was worse than any fight we could have had. I tried to explain, try to make him understand that it didn't mean anything, that I was drunk and confused and it was just a stupid mistake, but he wasn't hearing it. He kept asking me questions about what exactly happened, and I could see him dying a little more with each answer I gave. The worst part was how calm he was being, how reasonable and mature. It made me feel even worse somehow. The next few weeks were absolute hell, but not in the way you'd expect. Chris didn't kick me out or make some big dramatic scene. Instead, he just went completely cold. He slept in the guest room, barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was about practical things like bills or canceling wedding stuff. I kept trying to get him to talk to me, to fight with me, anything but this awful silence. I'd cry, I'd beg, I'd promise it would never happen again, but he just looked at me like I was someone he used to know. The worst part was that he was handling everything so maturely, so reasonably, and it made me feel even more terrible. I wanted him to be angry, to call me names, to give me something to push back against. But he just quietly started canceling wedding vendors and returning deposits. He moved out of our bedroom permanently and started looking for his own place. I thought maybe if I gave him space, he'd come around, but instead he just got more distant. Then I found out he'd told his parents what happened, and they were devastated. These people who'd treated me like a daughter for 3 years suddenly couldn't even look at me. His mom, who'd been so excited about planning the wedding with me, couldn't even be in the same room as me anymore. It was humiliating, but I tried to convince myself they were just being dramatic and judgmental. About a month after Vegas, Chris moved out completely. He packed his stuff while I was at work, left his key on the kitchen counter, and that was it. No big confrontation, no final fight, just gone. I tried calling him, texting him, even showed up at his new place once, but he made it clear he was done. He was done with me, clear and final, though he wasn't cruel about it. The engagement was over, and so were we. I was furious, not at myself, but at everyone else. I was angry at Haley for betraying me and telling Chris, angry at Chris for not fighting for us, angry at his parents for judging me so harshly. I convinced myself that if he really loved me, he would have forgiven me. I told myself that everyone makes mistakes, and if he couldn't handle one bad night, then maybe he wasn't meant to be. But deep down, I knew I had destroyed the best thing in my life, and I didn't know how to live with that. I started going out more, trying to prove to myself that I was still desirable, still worth something. I dated a few guys, nothing serious, just trying to fill the void left by Chris, but none of them made me feel the way he had, and that just made me angrier. 2 months after everything fell apart, I thought I was finally starting to move on. I'd been seeing this guy from work, nothing serious, but it felt nice to feel wanted again. But then I ran into Chris's mom at the hardware store, and everything changed. She looked older, sadder, and when she saw me, she didn't walk away or ignore me like I expected. Instead, she came right up to me and asked what had really happened. She said Chris had been completely devastated, but wouldn't give them any details. And as his mother, she needed to understand why their family had been torn apart. I don't know why I told her the truth. Maybe I was tired of carrying it alone. Maybe I wanted someone to understand that it wasn't as simple as everyone made it seem. But I told her everything about Vegas, about the guys, about what I'd done. I expected her to be angry, to yell at me, to tell me I was a terrible person. Instead, she just looked incredibly sad and said she wasn't surprised. She said she and Chris's dad had hoped I was ready to settle down and be a good wife, but they had always worried about my past catching up with me. Then she told me something that absolutely destroyed me. She said they'd been planning to give us money for a house down payment, the same amount they'd given Chris's sister when she got married, a significant amount that would have changed our whole future. But now they were donating it to a charity instead because they didn't want to support what she called my lifestyle choices. And that's when I completely lost it. I started yelling at her right there in the hardware store, telling her she had no right to judge me, that one mistake didn't define who I was as a person. But she just stood there, calm and disappointed, and said that actions have consequences, and I was old enough to know better. 2 days later, I got a bunch of angry texts from my sister. Somehow, word had gotten back to my parents about what really happened, actually happened in Vegas. They were furious, humiliated, and completely done with me. I felt like I'd been abandoned. My dad, who'd always been my biggest defender, no matter what, told me I'd thrown away the best man I'd ever find for a meaningless night with strangers. My mom said she was embarrassed to tell her friends why the wedding was suddenly off. Even my sister, who'd always been competitive with me and kind of a bit envious of, was disgusted. She said I'd never appreciated the good things I had in life and that I'd always chasing something else, something selfish, destructive, incapable. The worst part was everyone acting like I was some kind of a monster. Yes, I'd made a mistake, but people cheat all the time and work things out. Couples go to therapy, they forgive, and they move on. I wasn't the first woman to have a moment of weakness, and I wouldn't be the last, but everyone was treating me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin. I was angry at all of them, at Chris for being so rigid and unforgiving, at his parents for being so judgmental and self-righteous, at my own family for abandoning me when I needed their support the most. But I was angrier at myself for caring about what any of them thought. I'd spent 3 years trying to be the perfect fiance, the ideal perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect future wife-to-be. And for what? One night of fun? One moment of feeling alive and desired, and suddenly I was the villain in everyone's story? It wasn't fair, and I was sick of pretending I deserved all this judgment and punishment. 8 months later, I moved to a new city to start over completely. I couldn't stay in a place where everyone knew my business, where I couldn't go anywhere without running into someone who looked at me with pity or disgust. I told myself I was better off without all of them, that I deserved better than those people who wouldn't judge me so harshly for one mistake. I got a new job, a new apartment, started fresh, where no one knew about Vegas or Chris or any of it. But late at night in my new place, I sometimes wondered if they were all right, if I'd thrown away something real and valuable for something meaningless and temporary, if I'd always be the kind of person who destroyed good things because I couldn't appreciate them while I had them, because I always wanted something more, something different, something exciting. But I pushed those thoughts away because accepting them would mean admitting I was everything they said I was, and I wasn't ready to do that. I still believed I deserved better than their judgment, better than Chris's inability to forgive, better than all of it. 6 months into my new life in Houston, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I'd made new friends, started dating again, and almost never thought about Chris or that whole mess anymore. But then I got a Facebook notification that changed everything. Chris had gotten engaged, but to someone I recognized, Sarah, this girl who'd worked at the coffee shop we used to go to together. She was everything I wasn't. Sweet, innocent, probably never had a wild past or made any serious mistakes. The kind of girl who'd never even think about cheating, let alone actually do it. And seeing them together looking so happy and perfect, it made me realize that while I'd been starting to over, he'd been moving on, really moving on in a way that made it clear I'd never meant as much to him as I thought I had. What really got to me was seeing how his family had embraced her completely, her. His mom was already posting about wedding plans, planning. His sister was calling her the perfect addition to their family. All the things they'd said about me once upon a time, they were now saying about her, and probably meaning it this time. That's when it really hit me. I hadn't just lost my Chris, I had lost everything. His entire family, their money, their love, their support, their love. I'd lost the future we'd planned, the house we would have bought, the life we would have built. And for what? Two guys whose names I couldn't even remember, one night that meant absolutely nothing. But even now, even knowing all that, I can't quite bring myself to regret it completely. Not entirely. Because that night in Vegas, for just a few hours, I felt truly alive and free and powerful. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than a lifetime of trying to be the perfect wife to someone who would never really truly understand me anyway.